This video contains audio description. The content is presented by Yetnebash Nugusi Mola, UNICEF Disability Specialist. Photographs of children with disabilities from around the world. Disability Inclusion Training. Module 2, Stigma and Discrimination. Zakwande, 14, from South Africa, uses a communication board.
People often expect me to tolerate things I can't and behave in ways my body won't.
Sometimes, when people don't understand something or someone, they make wrong assumptions or develop negative beliefs about them. Persons with disabilities regularly face these kinds of negative beliefs because having a disability is often seen as something that's not normal by society. But what's normal really? There are so many different types of people in the world. People from different countries who speak different languages and belong to different religions and races. There really is no such thing as normal. Everyone is different. And stigma happens when people think of disabilities as something negative instead of seeing it as just one difference among the many differences that exist between human beings. There are still a lot of people in our societies that think persons with disabilities are less valuable than others. Because of these attitudes, people think or act as though persons with disabilities are not as good as them. Or society treats persons with disabilities differently and unfairly in a discriminatory way. This is just as bad as thinking that someone is inferior or less valuable because they are a woman or because they belong to a particular ethnic group. Even people who mean well can sometimes think or do things that are discriminatory. Sometimes it seems like people look at me and see nothing but an inspiring story. I don't want people to look at me and just see my disability. Having a disability is just one part of who I am. It's not the only thing that defines me.
Maria, 21, from Bulgaria.
When I turned 18, people still treated me like a child, and they still do. They still direct questions towards my primary caregiver. And I genuinely find this offensive and derogatory.
Disability discrimination happens when persons with disabilities are excluded or treated worse than others because of their disability. This can happen in ways that are more obvious and easy to spot, like when a bus driver refuses to let a passenger using a wheelchair board a public bus. But sometimes discrimination happens in ways that are more subtle and harder to notice. For instance, sometimes a law or a policy seems to apply to everyone equally. But if we look closer, it can actually disadvantage persons with disabilities.
When I first pursued the opportunity to sit the Cambridge Advanced English exam, I was told that for a few years the exam was taken online and there was a specific timer that needed to be abided by. But due to my disability, I wasn't able to abide by those time constraints.
Sometimes, persons with disabilities require certain adjustments to the way a service is delivered so that they can access it. And failing to provide these is also a form of discrimination.
Mark, 24, from Uganda, speaks in Ugandan Sign Language.
When I first started school, I was 7 years old. I didn't know anything about learning and thus what was being taught in the classroom. I could not understand the teacher throughout the lesson. Even the teachers didn't know anything about me and my needs. They saw I was deaf, but they didn't really connect that to what I needed in that situation.
Discrimination can happen on an individual level, or it can extend all the way up to the ways organizations or governments treat persons with disabilities.
Brian, 30, from Peru.
We used to have a law here which we call the interdiction law, which stopped persons with disabilities from voting, to get married, to have a bank account, even to inherit. A friend of mine with Down syndrome wasn't allowed to vote because the officials noticed she had a disability and thought she shouldn't vote.
And because disability discrimination is so pervasive, often the families and friends of persons with disabilities are also discriminated against.
People tend to look down on them and constantly remind them how different and difficult their life is because they have a family member or a friend with disability.
Because there are many other forms of discrimination in the world, a person with a disability who also belongs to another marginalized group, like indigenous people or people living in informal settlements or women and girls in some places, can face additional forms of discrimination and their life can be even harder.
Iman, 19, from Jordan.
I've noticed that when men use prosthetic limbs, people treat them normally. But when I let my prosthetic limb be seen, people make me feel uncomfortable. They say, "What do you think you're doing?" If my prosthetic can be seen in a photograph, people say, "That doesn't look nice. You're a girl."
Stigma and these different other types of discrimination can have all sorts of negative effects on persons with disabilities and their families. They may feel like they can't ask for help, or feel excluded and isolated, or have low self-esteem. Sometimes, if society doesn't make you feel valuable, you yourself start to feel you're not valuable. In a humanitarian crisis, stigma and discrimination against persons with disabilities can have a devastating and sometimes even life-threatening impact. They may not have the same chances to escape war or seek refuge, or be given access to life-saving assistance.
Ahmad, 16, from Jordan.
When we first came to the refugee camp, the toilets and kitchens were far away from the tent. And when my father would go out, people would stare at me. And when he'd return, they'd tell him, "Your son is annoying."
The big problem with discrimination is that it can limit life choices for persons with disabilities. And then, in turn, society develops low expectations of persons with disabilities. For example, if a school doesn't provide large print materials for its students who have low vision, this is discrimination. Those children may do worse in school or drop out altogether, not because they're not capable, but because they've been denied the same opportunities that their classmates had. And these kinds of experiences of discrimination in access to education may also mean that children with disabilities are less likely to get a well-paying job when they grow up. So what can we do about all of this? How can we work to reduce stigma and discrimination against persons with disabilities? For starters, ask yourself, are you or your colleagues or volunteers trained on disability stigma and discrimination? You can learn to recognize discriminatory behavior in yourself and others. And then, when you see it, you can take steps to respond to it. You can host an event to help people learn more about disability. You can educate yourself on disability inclusion so that you can help others if they're discriminated against. You can help educate your colleagues about what you learn about disability stigma and discrimination. You can find out if someone has a disability among the people you work with and listen to what they have to say about stigma and discrimination and see if they need additional support. And finally, be ready to do things differently for persons with disabilities when needed.
That's the solution. The institution providing the exam materials chose to have me sit the exam on paper and subsequently be given the extra time I would need to complete the exam in a calm manner. Please cut down on the bureaucratic aspect of such exemptions.
People with disabilities should be given the opportunity to take part in leadership and decision making. This way, community and society can see people with disabilities on the front lines of change, and this will help stop the discrimination and stigma on people with disabilities.
We should all be working to eliminate stigma and discrimination against persons with disabilities so that we don't face unfair obstacles and so that we can access all the essential services that people need to live their lives.
UNICEF, for every child, with technical support from CBM Global Disability Inclusion, with thanks to NORAD, Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. Video production by Highway Child.